Welcome, please welcome
to another episode of the Tools of the Trade podcast, your #1 construction industry resource. Hear conversations with industry professionals to get the tools, stories, and advice that you need to set your career on fire. You are now streaming the Tools of the Trade podcast.
This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Netsurance Canada. Get instant online quotes for insurance and bonds, even from a cell phone. Guys, it really is that simple. Just head over to netsurance.ca. That's NETSURANCE.ca for all of your insurance and bonding needs. Hello, friends. Thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode of Tools of the Trade. I'm your host, Colin Toop, and as always, thank you for your continued support in helping us become the #1 resource for the construction industry. This week's guest is the winner of Intuit and K2E's Top 10 Most Influential Bookkeepers in Canada award, Bob Wang. Bob started his career in accounting with the consulting firm KPMG. It wasn't long before he noticed the industry lacked high-quality, cloud-based bookkeeping services for entrepreneurs. Enter Legacy Advantage, a cloud-based bookkeeping firm founded by Bob, which grew to $1.8 million in annual revenue in just 3 years. And the kicker to all that, the company was then acquired by Deloitte and is now operating under the name Control, spelled CTRL. Bob writes articles for QuickBooks and as a fellow entrepreneur comes packed with a ton of great advice, not only on the accounting and bookkeeping side of things, but from the perspective of growing a small business. If you are in growth mode, curious about best practices for bookkeeping, or you're looking to build a brand that you can sell, this is the episode for you. Please get ready for this highly insightful conversation with Bob Wang. Bob, the first question I wanted to ask you before we get into a bit more of the intro, I want to know the difference between a CPA and a CA.
Is that a trick question?
I don't know, man. This is an honest question.
All right. So it's kind of a tricky one. So right now, everyone is a CPA because before there were 3 professions: the CA, chartered accountants; the CGA, I think they're called the certified general accountants; and then CMA, certified management accountants.
Okay.
So the 3 professions came together and said, look, we're spending so much money out-competing each other. Why don't we come together and form a new profession called the CPA? So now everyone's a CPA, but the CAs, they wanted that distinguishment for the next 10 years. So then all the CAs are now called CPA CAs. Now that only applies in Canada. In the States, it's just all CPA. So that's kind of brief history on the title.
Okay, so you are a CPA and a CA.
Correct, yeah.
Okay, and you were nominated, or I guess you were voted most influential bookkeeper. Recently, top 40 under 40 by CPA Practice Advisor. You've written tons of articles, which I will link to in the show notes after the episode because I took one look at your LinkedIn and it was just packed with good information. You're also an Intuit trainer and part of the Writer Network where you contribute articles and stuff like that. So can you talk about that just for a second? How'd you get involved with them?
That's a fun role. I'm really passionate about helping others and elevating others and helping others be successful. And that includes my peers. We can talk about that as well. I really see my colleagues in the industry as peers, not necessarily as competitors, because we really make each other better. Iron sharpens iron. And one way that I can contribute to the community is by sharing my journey, obstacles that I've overcome, and helping my colleagues elevate their business. So I express that passion to Intuit, and Intuit obviously is a provider for QuickBooks and TurboTax, and they have a similar passion to elevate their pro advisors, their accountants. And so because our goals aligned, I had content to share, so I got involved, and it's been really great. It's been super fulfilling for me, and it's been great content for my colleagues.
That's awesome. And I've read also that you're the treasurer of the Fringe Festival.
Yeah, that was up until summer of 2018 or 17. Yeah, I think it was summer 2018. I did it for about a year, and it took a couple of years, and it was really, really fun. I have a passion of supporting artists, so it was a good time.
Very cool. And you also are married, and how many kids?
Yeah, we got 2 kids now. One is a 3-year-old, which we just finished with potty training. Very cool. Wow. And our younger is 6 months old. So a lot happened in my life.
Yeah. So I mean, when I met you first, I was soliciting you for bookkeeping. And
Hmm.
then recently, when we reconnected, I see that you were acquired by Deloitte. So between all of that and
Yeah.
everything I just mentioned, plus wife and kids, how do you manage your time?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I got to give it up to my wife. She's been super supportive in taking care of the home, and without her, like none of this would have happened, right? So it's just kind of this division of labor, doing what we're good at, doing what we want to do. And her dream is always to be a full-time mom, stay-home mom with kids, and that's been her dream. And we both get to live each other's dream and support each other in that way. So that's been huge. And then the other skill set is just delegation. As you get busier, you always have to keep in mind, like, do I have to be doing this? Is there just someone else on my team that can be doing this? Whether it be a stretch assignment where they can be doing something, but not as well as you, but it's a great learning opportunity for them. You should get them involved, right? So yeah, delegation is a huge piece. The other one, just rest. Make sure you get 8 hours of sleep so you can hammer out the next 16 that you're awake. And
Yeah.
sleep is super important.
Very cool. Very cool. So I wanted to quickly dive into how you decided that you were going to start a bookkeeping firm
Yeah.
because I haven't really come across too many companies like yours or in general that offer very high quality bookkeeping services like yourself. So how did you decide that that was a niche that you were going to fill? Because were you working for Deloitte before you started that?
I was working for KPMG, which is also a Big Four accounting firm.
Yeah.
And I think that's a great question. I'll share my story from an accounting perspective, but I think it really can apply to all industries, especially people in the trades. So accountants typically do tax and audit and reviews, kind of the typical accounting things. And that's what I was doing as well. But through that process, I realized that small businesses have a hard time finding good quality bookkeepers. And that led to a lot of frustrations for all parties, right? So it was frustrating for me because I had to redo all that work. It was frustrating for the client because they had to pay extra. So it was just like a negative experience all around. And so I thought, why can't there be a CPA firm that provided high quality bookkeeping? And the reality was that in the market at the time, CPAs didn't want to do bookkeeping because it wasn't profitable. And then bookkeepers didn't necessarily have the training to account for all the complex transactions. So that's why it led to all this mismatch of skill set. And it really provided a need in the market. So instead of waiting for someone else to solve that problem, I solved the problem myself by creating a firm called Legacy Advantage to address that particular problem. And the traction was immediate, right? In my first year, our business grew to $500,000. In our second year, we doubled to more than one. And then third year, on track to doubling again, we were acquired by Deloitte for about $1.8 million. So it was a really quick journey, quick turnaround. But I think the main lesson there is, as you're doing your work, don't just like do the work, right? Think about what other problems there are in the market. Think about how you can creatively solve it. So I hear very often that this trade or this plumber or this whatever doesn't provide the great service, or super disorganized and create a lot of frustration for their team members. Well, if you create a business that can solve these issues in a scalable and profitable way, then you're definitely going to win in the marketplace, right? So yeah, don't just focus on the work, but think about how you can do it better.
Yeah, I've seen that a lot where people get pigeonholed into just trying to work for every contractor and provide the same level of service that most people do, and they don't find that lane that they can steer into. And
That's
whether
right.
whether
Yeah.
that's high quality work or you're doing something that people, like you said, don't want to do or don't do a good job of. And there's a million
Mhm.
things that I could think of, but most people just pick up and they start and they take it as a broad scope macro view. I'm going to do everything. I'm going to wire everything. I'm going to plumb everything. I'm going to just be everything to everybody. And I find when
Exactly.
you spread your focus out like that, it's very hard to stay in your lane and you get distracted. And I feel like that hinders growth.
Absolutely. There's a saying, if you're everything to everyone, you're nothing to nobody. So if you really find your niche, you can find your audience. I've seen some really successful roofing companies that just focus on eco roofs, right? And it's this whole new trend now, and everybody calls him because he's the eco roof guy. It's not a very big market, but it's growing, and he's the guy in that industry, right? Or let's say electrifying the garage, right? I think there's some complexity there in turning up the amperage for electric cars, and that's a whole new trend. And if you can
Yeah.
carve out a niche in that, then you're going to get a lot of calls.
Yeah, that's a huge niche right now. And the one issue that they're kind of worried about is that the hydro infrastructure can't actually support all the people that are going to need to plug in over time. So
I recently ran into that issue. So I drive a BMW i3,
yeah.
and right now I just plugged into a standard 110 volts plug, and I wanted to upgrade to a level 2 charger, right? And so I called an electrician in. He's like, "Yeah, your house can't handle the increased amperage. It's already maxed out. You have to like change the whole panel and add a line or whatever." I'm like, "Oh my gosh, and it's so expensive because the house is what I think 30 years old, and they didn't know the house is going to need so much electricity, right? So yeah,
Yeah.
there's a whole new trend in that industry.
Yeah. Well, I want to steer this in the direction that's going to help a lot of people listening to this podcast. I want to start at formulating your own business and the first steps that you need to look out for. And then I want to take that in the trajectory of tips that contractors can use for cash flow and common issues that they run into as their business
Oh, for
starts to
sure.
scale. So I was hoping that you could start us off with, let's say, take somebody, for example, that is a painter or a similar profession and they're going out on their own for the first time. What do they need to do from the outset to ensure that they've set a solid foundation for their books and their accounting?
Yeah. So at the outset, I would say basic level, get insurance, get the proper structure of your business. You can talk to a lawyer about that. I think the higher risk your business is, the more you should incorporate. So, setting up the basic structure. In terms of the accounting side, really differentiate between direct cost and overhead. So let me define that a bit. Direct cost is labor and materials that are used specifically for doing the job. So that's things like, your subcontractors or your employees that are actually on the job. Those are direct labor. The material that you use to actually paint or install or whatever, that's direct material. Now, that's important because the difference between your revenues and those direct costs is your gross profit. And for a service business like you and I, it should be around 50%, plus minus 5%, right? So that should be your target. Now, overhead is things like managers, supervisors, hydro. So anything that's not directly job related. So for example, if you have a supervisor that's, half the time on the job, half the time managing the team and being in the office, then you should split his or her wages half direct wages or direct labor, half overhead, right? So that distinction is super important because you need to know that you're actually profitable on every job that you do. That's super, super important. Does that clarify things at all, or is
Yeah.
there anything else I can help define better?
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. And one of the things that I've witnessed a lot, even still to this day, with people that have had businesses, especially contractors, for over 10 years, is they've never tracked the job cost.
Oh, that's huge. Yeah,
They've got cash in the bank and their credit cards are paid off, and that's all they care about. And I think that
yeah.
if you're trying to scale that, I've been on the other end of that where scaling happened too quick and then you start
Mm,
to have a negative cash flow, which is never a good position
yeah.
for an extended period of time. But what does somebody need when they're first getting set up? How do you recommend that they actually physically do their books? Because they may not be in a position to hire somebody on a monthly or an hourly basis. Would you
Yeah.
recommend something as simple as Excel, or is it better to get started off with like a QuickBooks immediately?
Yeah, okay. There's, I think, a couple ways to answer that. So if you are like bare bones and you know nothing about accounting, I would say in the lease, get a separate credit card and separate bank account so that you can track your expenses separate from your personal, expenses, right? So at the very least, at the end of the year, the account can take your bank statements and credit card statements and generate a set of financials based on, your organized cards. But one level up, I would say, yeah, definitely use something like QuickBooks to get started because QuickBooks can do estimates, QuickBooks can issue invoices, QuickBooks now can do even job costing. It can issue progress invoices, and yeah, I think that's a really great place to start. It can even take credit cards, so you can issue the invoice. The customer gets that invoice in their email. They can pay right there, and you get the money a couple of days later. So it's a really great DIY tool to start.
And once you have that set up, how often should you be reviewing your financials?
Yeah, it's a good question. I would say you should be reviewing your job costs at least weekly because if you have a daily job or jobs that are pretty small, you should definitely review after every single job that's complete. And if you have a larger job, you need to have a budget for each job and track that weekly. Because if you don't look at your jobs for more than 2 weeks, it's hard to adjust because you're letting too many things go wrong without making adjustments. So on the job cost level, definitely weekly. On the monthly financials or on the fund financials, I do recommend monthly, especially if you're scaling. If you're growing really quickly, you're spending a lot of money, you want to make sure that all your expenses are in the right places. If you're a pretty mature business, or if you don't want to scale very quickly, you just want to have a steady kind of job without growing too fast, then I would say quarterly is probably fine.
Okay. And so is there anything in particular that people need to look out for when they're reviewing their finances to make sure that their head's above water? I just know that when people start talking about money, and this, I feel as though this is a large percent of the population, not just as business owners, but as individuals looking at their own finances. I don't know a lot of people that do a check-in of their own bank account, let alone their
Yeah.
business financials. So what should people be focusing on when they're doing that quarterly or monthly review of the bigger picture?
Yeah, for sure. So I think we need to have a conversation about the difference between profit and cash flow because they're very different things. And so the first thing you should look at is your profit and loss statement. And the profit and loss statement, or some people call it income statement, shows your total revenues, your gross profits, and then your net profit. So the difference, gross profit shows your profit minus all the direct costs, and your net profit shows like your actually net profit. The net profit doesn't mean anything if your cash flow sucks. So you can get into a situation where you have a big job, you're really profitable, but your customer is not paying you for 120 days. Well, dang, you're going to go down. Your business is going to fail because you have no cash to pay your employees or pay your suppliers, right? So the next thing to really look out for is your accounts receivable balance. So accounts receivable is on your balance sheet, and you should have a report that's called the AR aging ledger. AR aging shows you all the invoices that are old, that are 30 days old, 60 days old, and 90 days old. And as a contractor, you should really not have anything more than 60 days old, because otherwise it's really hard to chase down, right? So in fact, try your best to get that cash or get that payment right there before you leave that job. So, for a small business, and especially for something that, like our industries, cash flow is huge. Cash flow, I would say it's even more important than profit.
With regards to cash flow, it can become a sticky situation because, and this is something that I wanted your advice on, because I know that this is going to help a lot of people. Typically with contractors, we are not paid up front. So if you're
Yeah,
really lucky and you've built rapport with somebody, you get a deposit.
totally.
So let's take two types of jobs. You've got a quick
Yeah,
turnaround job, say like a tenant improvement, where you've got a client that's leasing a space. They need to move in quick. You're in and out of there in a couple months, and you've built, say, a restaurant or a coffee shop. But if
yeah,
you're building a house, once the house is framed and you go in there to wire it, you're not coming back to put the finishing touch on the house, depending on the size, for up to a year, if not more, later. And that last 30% that you may be pulling out of that house or that project that is extended, where you have a physical gap between the roughing in
yeah,
and of the work, sometimes your whole profit can be sucked away in that last payment. And that's assuming that everything goes well at the end of the job. So you have these jobs that get drawn out over a year, and technically you've invoiced for, I mean, you've done progress billing, but you have a
yeah,
lump sum, and sometimes it sits on your AR list for a long time and you're not able to
yeah,
collect it, even if you have some of that cost or most of that cost expended up front. And it's
yeah,
very difficult conversation to have with a general contractor. I'm not sure what it's like with the client side, because typically if you're in a home services company and you're dealing directly with a client, it's due on receipt because you're going to repair something in their home. But
yeah.
when you're working for a contractor, what do you think people could deploy as a tactic to help curb that, or to a conversation or some sort of verbiage that they could deploy to try and get cash out of their contractor up front? Because it's a huge issue
It's
for
a
a lot
huge
of
pain.
people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not necessarily sure how to answer that one. I'll take it from the perspective of like how to prepare for that situation. So, I think it's great that you mentioned that, because for those of your audience that doesn't have a business yet and want to get into the business, they have to be prepared knowing that this is going to happen to them, right? And in that situation, you need to go into these projects knowing that you're going to front some cost. Therefore, first of all, you should price in that carrying cost. So, let's say you need to take out a loan. Well, you're paying a couple of percent interest on that loan, right? So that cost should be incorporated as much as possible into your price. But yeah, you should have some sort of line of credit to help you tie you over to cover for these situations. And banks are pretty good. Once you have maybe a year's worth of track record, they're willing to give you, let's say 50, 60, 70% of your AR as kind of line of credit, so that when you get into these situations, you're okay. What has been your experience? Have you had those conversations with GCs, and what do they usually say? I think to an extent, it depends on the GC itself, right? If you have a good relationship, and you can be like, hey dude, like I got to cover my bills, can you give me like 10% out of the 30, something like that. But
yeah, no, for me, my experience it's been unique because I started off doing large industrial construction. In between there, I've had my own company and done commercial construction. And when I had my own business, we were working for a lot of smaller contractors.
yeah.
And for them or with them, it's a little easier to build rapport. So you can say, here's our pricing structure and here's why. And, maybe you're collecting 10 to 20% up front. You're collecting up to 70% after the rough-in is finished and you've passed your rough-in inspection. And then when you come back to finish the job, you're collecting the remaining 30 if there's no deficiencies. Holdback is a whole nother thing. Some people deploy it, some people don't. Some GCs are really sticky about it. That's a whole separate conversation that we could have about holdbacks and that type of shenanigans that happens all the time. But yeah, I think if you're open and honest with your GC and you've built rapport with them and you do a good job for them a few times and you've built some sort of track record that you are going to come back, you are going to finish the job, you are going to do what you say you did, because that's another stigma that's attached to the industry.
Yeah.
And he never comes back. And
Right.
then, those of us that are doing it the right way are also looking at people saying, well, we're in one of the few industries where we do the work before you pay us. Like, you don't go to
Yeah.
Starbucks and order a coffee and taste it and then ask for your money back after.
Yeah,
I mean, I guess
totally.
you could, but
Yeah.
we front everything, right?
Totally. Yeah.
And it also depends too what you're putting into the project. If you have a major piece of equipment or material that has to get ordered ahead of time, you just have to be really clear before you even start the job. Usually in the estimate, we have X material or X equipment that's going to have a 90-day lead time. It's going to cost $10,000. We require this upfront upon the signature and the PO. And then that
That's
way
right.
they've already agreed to it. But you can never get caught on your heels and then try and claw back for it in the end. It just
Yeah.
never works that way.
And to your point, it takes time to establish that rapport. So, maybe advice that we can conclude here is, don't bite off more than you can chew. In a way, start off with a small job, start off working with the small GCs, be able to build that treasure chest, build that credibility, build that rapport, build your credit rating so that you can get that big line of credit. And once you have that war chest, then you go ahead and go for that big contract that can, tie all your cash up, but it's going to be rewarding once it's all done, right? So
Yeah.
that progress, I think the natural progress is important.
Yeah. And that leads me into thinking about another thing that's top of mind in terms of financials and accounting and bookkeeping is paying yourself. And I think a lot of people get hooked on the idea that having your own company means that you're instantly going to be paying yourself way more than you've ever made in your life.
Yeah.
And that's
Myth
definitely
busted.
yeah, that myth is completely busted. I mean,
Yeah.
it takes a long time to even make what you could make working for somebody else if
Totally.
you have seniority within a company. But how do you recommend that people think about when is the right time to pay themselves and how much they can actually take out, if you have any advice at all?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, math works as, if you want to be more profitable, you do more work yourself. If you want to build a team right away, then just know that your team gets paid first. That's what sucks about being a business owner, right? As a business owner, you really do get paid last. So when you first start off your business, have that discussion. Do you want to be profitable? I know some sub trades that it's just themselves and maybe a partner. They have no employees and they rig in 100 grand a year. Good for them, but they're working their butts off, right?
Yeah.
And then they can never grow beyond that, and that's okay if that's what you want to do, and perfectly fine. On the other hand, I know some sub trades or contractors. They hire a team right away, and they have nothing to pay themselves. So two ends of the spectrum. When you're deciding how much to pay yourself, I think you should make the distinction between you as an employee and you as an owner. Okay, you as an employee and you as an owner. And in that mental exercise, think about if you hired someone else in your role, how much would this person get paid? So, for example, you're the senior technician, the journeyman. So let's call it 100 grand. Is that reasonable?
Yeah.
They're pretty senior. Okay. So if you have a journeyman on your team and that person happens to be you, then you should be paying yourself that 100 grand, right? And then everything else left over, that should be taken out as a dividend, and as an owner. The reason why I say that is because if you budget properly and the cost of your labor as an employee is in your books, then it's easily replaceable if you want to hire someone else. So for example, you say, look, today I don't want to be a journeyman anymore. Starting from now, I will hire someone else. Well, how much can you afford to pay that person? That 100 grand, right? But that also means that you are no longer getting that payment as an employee. So really think about your compensation between you as an employee and you as an owner. You wouldn't pay a supervisor, let's say $200,000. You'd pay them maybe 150, right? And the rest you can take as an owner. So yeah, that's the way I would think about it. In terms of how to take it out, there's the difference between salary and dividends. So there's obviously this tax conversation that you need to have with your tax accountant, because everyone's tax situation is different. But from my perspective, all the wages, all the dollars that are owed to you as an employee, you should take as a salary, and everything else should be taken as a dividend.
Now, when you replace yourself with the example where you were paying yourself a journeyman wage or a supervisor wage, and then you hire for that position, are you still going to be paying yourself typically as a salary, or is it going to turn into a dividend at that point when you're a true owner?
At that point, you got to really ask yourself, like, what's your role? If you just replace yourself as a supervisor, then you as a business owner, as a CEO, are you moving now to a sales role, right? Is that the shift that's happening? If so, what is this estimated, the salesperson, what do they usually get paid? So every role that you take on, you should think about what is the market rate for that role, and that's how much you should be paying yourself.
Fair enough. That makes logical sense.
Yeah, and you talked about having enough cash in your business. So I would say the generic rule is that you have 3 months of cash to 3 months of cash to leave in your bank. But obviously, that depends on kind of your type of business. But if you have a big job coming up, then like you said, make sure to have enough cash in your business to cover for that long payment term.
I guess it also depends on your lifestyle too. If you want to go
Depends on your
pop
lifestyle.
bottles every weekend.
Yeah, exactly. Honestly, okay, so I want to issue a warning here. A lot of entrepreneurs, they use their businesses as a credit card. In fact, oh man, I ran into a situation where it was a business owner. He set up company A, and he maxed out all the credit cards. He basically bled the company dry, and then he declared bankruptcy on company A and set up company B, and did the same thing again and set up company C and bankrupted company B. And that's horrible, because the vendors of company A and B are basically paying for this person's lifestyle without getting anything back, right? So, as a business owner, be really careful about your business. Your business is not your credit card, right? Your business, it needs to be a self-sustaining entity. So don't overdraw your account.
Now, with that being said, it's common, I think, for everybody to treat themselves once in a while, whether that's a meal that you're technically saying you're out with a client for or something like that. Do you have any parameters or ways to think about that aspect of spending? If you're going to do it reasonably, like maybe you're going to buy the team dinner or you're going to take your wife out for a meal.
Those things are absolutely fine. Those are reasonable things, but just don't take like a 2-week vacation in Hawaii, and put it in a business, right? Don't do that. Or don't take first class flights to, across North America when you don't need to, right? So don't live large, but definitely spoil yourself and spoil your team once in a while.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Now, when somebody's thinking of looking for a full-time bookkeeper for themselves, how do you recommend them thinking about freelance bookkeeping versus company style bookkeeping, like your style? And what's the difference between an hourly model and a monthly model?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I think when you first begin, it definitely makes more sense to hire a part-time bookkeeper or hire a contract bookkeeper, because you don't need someone full-time, 40 hours a week in there, doing your books. You don't have that much to do, right? The way I see it, the difference between a freelance and a business is just the level of talent that you get. So first of all, if you go with a freelance bookkeeper and this bookkeeper needs to go on holiday, then you're hooped, right? You're see you later, see you in 2 months, right? Or see you in 2 weeks. Or if this bookkeeper, is sick, or all of a sudden, has a medical emergency, you are left in a bind. Whereas with a business, systems are put in place to have those backup plans, right? So let's say, your go-to bookkeeper needs to go on holiday, no problem. There's always a backup. If this bookkeeper leaves the firm, then there's always someone else to step in to carry on. So I would say there's more continuity, more backups with a business version of a bookkeeper. That's typically the difference. Now, as you grow, I think it does make sense to bring your bookkeeping in-house, especially once you start reaching 20, 30 people, $1 million or so. It starts to get too busy, and the outside bookkeeping might get more expensive. You need to look at your costs there. But I would say, as a contractor, you're really not qualified to hire a bookkeeper. Just like me, I'm not qualified to choose my electrician other than based on reviews, right? So it's really hard to assess someone else's technical skill. So what I would recommend in that interview process, when you're actually hiring for someone, bring them in and show them your books and say, tell me what's wrong with it. Tell me how I can improve, and actually do a bank reconciliation for me. Obviously you should do your personality assessment, take 30 minutes, get to know who they are, but you should always have a kind of a second step in your interview process. And that's like actually them doing the work for half an hour and see how they do. If they're really struggling, if they're like complaining, oh, I don't know how to do this, or I'm so flustered, it's probably not a good fit, right? You want someone confident that knows what they're doing, knows, that can really manage it, and that's the right person to bring onto your team.
It's interesting you mentioned that, because I've heard somebody else that I know use that tactic when hiring another trade person to add to their
Yeah,
company. They'll give them sort of a quiz,
yeah,
calculate these amperages for me. If this was a house and we gave you a set of drawings, how would you wire this room?
mm,
It's some generic things that somebody should know to vet
yeah,
their technical skill, because as much
right,
as you can train
yeah,
people that have the right mentality, when you're dealing with something like electricity that's quite dangerous, somebody like that you hire needs to have the technical capability as well. And although you can teach it, you can't teach all of that on the fly. They have to have some of that coming in. So it's interesting you say that, because that would be a good exercise for people to have their bookkeeper do for sure.
yeah. It's not any different, right? No matter how good of a person they are, they need to have the basics to even just help you out, right? Otherwise, you just have a dead body on your team.
Yeah. Now, if somebody's looking for a bookkeeping firm,
Hmm.
what types of designations or things should they be looking for in that interview process when they're looking externally, not to bring it in,
Yeah.
but to hire a third party like Legacy?
Yeah. So the two largest software providers are QuickBooks and Xero, Xero. So if you use QuickBooks, then you should definitely look for a QuickBooks Pro Advisor. Those are people that are trained, that have taken the test. So look for that certification. Same thing with Xero. You need to have Xero certified bookkeepers or accountants. The second thing I would look for is have the conversation with, you know, the firm, and just ask them, like, do you have any experience with the trades? What do you see as common issues with, people in my industry, and how can you proactively help my business, or have you done that in the past? Because I think, as there are more and more bookkeepers out there, like, doing the data entry is no longer enough, or you should demand for higher service in that, right? What you really want to look for is a business partner, someone that can look out for you, someone that can interpret, financials for you, especially if you're not a sophisticated business owner, and someone to kind of help you grow through to the next stage. Now, obviously, if you don't want that, or if you're not willing to pay for that, no worries. You should still ask that question, because someday you will want that advice, right? Someday you will want that proactive CFO almost to be on your team. So that's, I think, a really big aspect. Thirdly, I would just ask them how big their team is. So if they have more than like 5 people, that's probably good enough. They have enough rotation to kind of cover for each other. If there's a team of 2 or 3, you know, just ask yourself, like, do you want to take that risk in case one person is sick or has to go on holiday? Like, you might be in a lurch where you don't get your financials every month.
Right. And is that something that people should expect? How does that look if you're hiring an external third party bookkeeper? Is
Hmm.
that something that, so I understand that you do want them to play on your team if they see a glaringly obvious issue with your
Hmm.
books or money's falling out of holes all over the place and you're
Yeah.
seeing it, they should alert you. But
You know what? That's a good question. So don't assume anything, right? Just ask that question. Do you alert me when these situations happen? And it really depends. So some people say, yes, we do. It's part of our standard package, right? In our case, we say, no, our standard package does not include that proactive analysis. If you want us to do proactive analysis, we got to bring in someone more senior and run through those numbers with you. So just make sure to ask that question. Is it included? Is it not included? If it's included, then you can expect that. If it's not included, then you got to pay for it.
Right. One other thing in regards to cash flow is when people have to start paying corporate income tax.
Mm.
And I remember my first large payment and then being told, because I didn't know, that you're going to have quarterly installments the
Right.
following year. So, do you recommend that people start with the quarterly installment right away so that it's not such a shock and they don't have to try and remember, oh, here's roughly how much we're going to be paying at the end of the year. We need to keep this set aside.
Yeah, that's a good question. And you know what? Maybe that's something to remember when you have a conversation with your tax accountant. So, when you get your taxes back, like the first thing you should look out for is how much taxes you're going to be paying for the last year. But the next thing you should look out for is what are the installments for the next year. So maybe I'll give you some background on like what is an installment. So, CRA wants their money, right? Like the government wants their money. And if you owe more than $10,000 in the prior year, the CRA will think, okay, so this guy is owing us 10 grand for 365 days. I don't want that to happen to anymore. You need to pay us every quarter. That's the CRA's mentality, right? If you owe more than 10 grand in the previous year, and they're going to assume that you're going to owe the same, if not more this year. So they want to put you on a payment plan so they get their cash faster. It's their way of managing cash flow, so to speak, right?
Mhm.
So, when you look at your tax return, first thing, make sure you pay your taxes. Number two is look at your installments. The other thing is you can talk to your bookkeeper, and this may be an additional added service, is to actually calculate income tax accrual to add to your books. So what that means is, let's say every 3 months, you actually create an entry that accrues what you're going to owe by the end of the year. So for example,
Can I just put a brakes on this for a second? Because accrue is a very important word, I think, and I'd like you
okay.
to define it.
Oh man. Oh gosh. Okay. So there's accrual-based accounting and cash-basis accounting. Cash-basis accounting happens when you're actually accounting for all the transactions based on your bank statement. That is probably okay for when you are small, but as you grow bigger, you need to look at an accrual-based accounting. An accrual-based accounting is where you're actually matching the revenues and expenses based on the period in which it was incurred, even if the cash was paid out later. So for example, let's say you have a big bill for $10,000. You used a lot of paint. And today's, let's say September. You finished a job, you used the paint in September, right? But you have 30 days to pay. So you pay that bill off in October. So when should that bill actually show up in your books? September or October? If it was cash basis accounting, that bill would show up in October. But if it was accrual based accounting, it would show up in September. And it's more accurate in September because you did the job in September, right? Right. So you did the job in September, you have to pay it, you have to accrue that expense in September. Therefore, your revenues matches your expenses in that same period. Does that make
Right.
sense?
Yeah, it makes sense.
If you did the job in September, but you paid it in October and you use cash basis accounting, then your revenues and expenses are off, right? You recognize revenues sooner than you actually recognize the expense. So that's the issue when you do cash basis accounting. So going back to income taxes, right? If you made, let's say, $30,000 for January, February, March, well, the tax on that is actually incurred in that period. So the more accurate rate of accounting is actually creating accrual. So let's say 15% of the $30,000 and create that as an income tax accrual so that you're not caught off guard at the end of the year. So maybe a bit too technical here, but you can just tell your accountant, accrue my income taxes. They'll know what you mean.
There you go.
Yeah.
From Bob himself, accrue it,
Yeah.
guys. One of the other directions I wanted to take this interview, and I know that we've got about 20 minutes left here, but you've also, I remember when I first met you, you had some very practical advice and good advice for scaling business. And I
Mhm.
feel as though you've achieved a very high level of success in that regard because you went from nothing to acquisition in 3 years.
Mhm.
You had 30 people working for
Mhm.
Legacy.
Mhm.
So I wanted to get your thoughts on some of the common misconceptions about scaling and growing a business from the ground up, and maybe a couple of the hurdles that you had to jump through or lessons learned that people could directly apply to their early years in their companies.
Yeah, of course. As you're scaling a business, never underestimate how important your people are. I would say that is the most important thing, especially for a service business like ours, right? Your people are everything. They are customer service, they are the brand, they are everything. So finding the right people is super important. Now, in order to find the right people, you got to know what the right person means. Like, how do you define the right person? So, one of the first exercises that I did was defining what is my ideal culture? What are my core values? How do I define an A player on my team? Because an A player to me is a B player to someone else, or vice versa, right? So, knowing who you exactly want in terms of their talent, their skill set, their personality will help you to narrow down who the right team member is. And then you go out and find them. You post on, Indeed or whatever, and say, this is exactly the type of person that I'm looking for. And these people will come to you because they know that you are looking for someone just like them. Once you've brought them on your team, I think retention is a big piece, right? One thing that we focused on is finding, training, and retaining the right talent. So as you think about building your business, like, don't abuse your employees. So don't think about a human resource. Think of it as a human capital. Like, they are an asset on your team, and you need to grow that asset by investing in them, training them, and helping them become better professionals in their field. I actually, in preparation for this interview, I talked to a good friend of mine who runs a painting business, and I said, "You guys run a first class painting business, right? Your team members have stayed with you for 5 years. That is so rare in the trades business, so rare. What are you guys doing that's making a big difference?"
Hmm.
And he said, first of all, full-time hours, right? I think that's so basic, but it's actually quite hard to achieve because the trades businesses, the jobs don't come all the time, right? So you gotta schedule your jobs so that you don't have too much up and down, and you can give fewer people more hours, full-time hours, right? Because
That's right.
yeah, you got to. That's one way to keep them. The second piece is profit share. You don't have to start right away. You don't have to do it after every single job, but start thinking about how you want to reward your employees for being fast, being efficient, being loyal. Just give them that extra bonus, right? And it doesn't have to be a lot. It could be like, here, hey, here's $100 for last month. $100 is actually a lot of money if you just want to take it out and celebrate. That's like a steak dinner for like 2.5 people, or it's a lot of beer to celebrate in a particular weekend. So think about how to motivate your employees from a financial perspective. And then, team build, right? You know, do a retreat, go hang out. I don't know what you want to do, but that team culture is really important. What about you, Colin? Like, what have you guys done to try to motivate your employees?
It was a similar thing. One of the things that helped us along the way was biweekly meetings,
Hmm.
getting the team together on a biweekly basis, just providing light breakfast and coffee for the guys and being able to hear the struggles that they're having from the field and maintaining very open and clear lines of communication and making people know that it's okay to feel vulnerable and tell people exactly how you feel and address it with the group. One of the things that I think a lot of people struggle with is when the phone rings and somebody says, "We have a huge problem." And you get stuck in this feedback loop of, "We got a
Hmm.
problem, we got a problem, we got a problem." So what we did also was in those biweekly meetings, we had a whiteboards covering all our walls, and we made a list of accidents, fun mistakes, we'd call them. Like we'd try and word it in a way that didn't make it seem like you were just going to get stuck in this negative headspace. And we would leave things on the board until we came up with a solution, a system, a checklist, or whatever it was going to be that would mitigate that issue. And when people see that they're being heard and that the struggles that they're facing out there are being resolved and it's being
Hmm.
resolved by the team and they have input, you look to them and you say, what do you think? Rather than saying,
Right.
this is how it should be done.
Right.
And you give them the ability to formulate their own
Empower your team
decisions.
members, right?
Exactly. Empower
Yeah.
them, let them lead, let them make decisions. Then they get the buy-in, because then they
Yeah.
feel, even, not to say that it's kind of like a hack, but you want people to feel as though they're making the decision.
Hmm.
And when they do, and when you have that empowerment, you feel like you are an extension of the company. You are an owner, you are an ambassador, and you start counting the amount of wire you're using on site, or the amount of
Yeah.
morettes that you're pulling out of your van. And then when you
Yeah.
start tying in that financial incentive as well, like you mentioned, that all brings it together. Because when people see that they've succeeded, and we show metrics and we're very open with our books, guys, this
Hmm.
is where we're at profit wise.
Yeah.
Want to share some of that profit. And they say,
Yeah.
wow, so you're going to give me X%. Well, I'm going to make sure that I'm recycling all my used
Yeah.
material, and I'm doing this and that. And then you start to see the efficiency go up, because they see their cash is directly tied to the state of the business. So
Exactly.
those are some things for sure.
There's a great saying that you can give responsibility, but ownership must be taken. Like, you can't give ownership. The ownership has to be taken by the person that actually wants to take it. And
Yeah.
so a big part of being a leader is that you have to motivate your team and then allow them to take that ownership by sharing information, sharing culture, sharing life together, right? So those are all really, really great points.
Yeah. You wrote an article about leadership, didn't you?
Oh, I write a lot of articles about leadership. It's a topic that I'm super passionate about. So
Yeah. What do you think are the top 1 to 2 things that people need to start thinking about when they're becoming a leader? Because I have a feeling that a lot of people think that they're not what somebody would call a quote unquote natural born leader. I'm not a natural
mhm,
born leader. I never made a captain of my sports team. I never
yeah,
really was in charge of a group of people. I was kind of an introverted person, so I could never be a leader. And I think I
yeah,
even had that mentality until I realized that it's a skill that you can acquire and that you can
mhm,
train and you can educate yourself on. So what are a couple of things that come to mind when you're thinking
yeah.
about leadership?
So I would say first thing is realize how important it is. There's a saying, everything rises and falls on leadership. And that's, I would say, true. Like, if you look at any problem in the world, you can boil it down to a leadership problem, right? Whether it be in a climate crisis, the leaders fail to lead, right? Or whatever it might be, it's the leader's fault. And, secondly, to your point, like, you got to have a learning mindset. Leadership is a skill that you have to learn to use. But if your mindset is like, I don't know how to do it, I will never know how to do it, then yeah, you're right. You'll never know how to do it. I think
Hmm.
you and I, we weren't natural leaders to begin with, but it seems natural to us now because we've used it so much, right? We read books, we practice, we fail, we adapt. That's called learning. So, you said yourself, you're not a reader, but you're a great listener. Or you learn by listening to a podcast and audiobook. So keep doing that, right? My favorite book on leadership is called Five Levels of Leadership by John Maxwell. He writes tons of leadership books, and all of them are super amazing. So it's definitely a skill that you can learn. What do you think? Would you agree with that, Colin?
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think for anybody listening that feels as though it's a daunting task to be a leader, whether it's a leader of one or a leader of a team
Hmm.
or a leader of a business unit or whatever the case, it is a difficult job, especially if the buck stops with you and you're in charge of financial state of a company.
Hmm.
And I kind of look at business this way, and I never saw it as this way before, but I've changed my mindset on 2 things. One thing is, the reason why people get a salary increase is typically comes with an added amount of leadership and an added amount of stress. And you're
Hmm.
compensated financially to take on those 2 things.
Hmm.
The other thing I think as well was clearing up one thing for me that I had a constant struggle with, which was what people call work life balance.
Hmm.
And I was constantly asking myself and searching for work life balance. What is a work life balance? How can I achieve that? I feel like I'm
Hmm.
working too hard or I'm stressed out all the time.
Hmm.
Until I heard somebody say something, and I can't remember when this was, but then it clicked, is you will constantly search for work life balance if you have not found your life's work. Because when you find your life's
Hmm.
work, work work becomes an extension of your life, and you really enjoy what you do and you're
Right.
passionate about it and you're reaping the reward, then
Yeah.
you no longer have to worry about it because you are in harmony with what you do for a living. It
Hmm.
becomes your life's work versus work life balance. So those are
That's
two
right.
two delineations that that I've kind of come to. But yeah, I think leadership for sure is a skill that you can acquire, that you can learn, and it does take practice and time. But there's a new generation of leaders coming, and yourself, you're 30, I'm 30. We're all coming up, and it's up to us. It's going to be up to us to change the landscapes of our industries to the way that we want them to be. And if you become a leader now, you have the opportunity to influence an entire generation, because the baby boomers are coming out. We're at the perfect age where we're starting to step into leadership and management positions in companies or own businesses. And it's up to us as leaders. Like you said, we're not going to solve climate change, but we can take little proactive steps to change the landscape of our industries. And I think that's very important for people to realize that they can make a difference.
And to your point, it's not a small task. Leadership is not to be taken lightly. They're saying that the more responsibility you take on, the less rights you have. And I really feel that, because as a leader, the most effective leaders are servant leaders. They make their team better by serving them, by elevating them, right? So for example, and as an employee, if you had a hard day, like, you can complain all you want. But as a leader, if you have a hard day, you can't complain to anyone. You have to
just
take it, because you have no right to be negative, because you have a team to serve, right? If something goes wrong and the client complains, well, as an employee, you can be like, I'll deal with it till Monday. As a leader, like, no, you don't have right to that anymore. You have to do something about that. So it's not a small task, and you have to consciously want to lead, but also know that you're giving up. But then, hopefully you'll see it as a rewarding exercise, because you have an opportunity to impact an entire generation.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's one other topic I want to jump into just for a quick second before I get to some closing stuff that I want to go through with you. You went through an acquisition recently. What were a couple learning lessons or takeaways that you learned from that experience? Because some people listening to this are either going through it or going to go through it, and they may need a bit of advice.
Yeah. So okay, first of all, we're service businesses, and service businesses are notoriously hard to sell, because what do you truly have? You have a customer list, you have a team, and you may have some know-how, but that's about it. So you really got to package your business to be sellable. Okay, so what does that mean? It means that, first of all, the business does not depend on you as the owner. So you need to have a management team in place. You need to have supervisors in place. You need to have a system that generates leads for you. So for me, I built a really great website that generated 70 leads a month, that translated to about 10,000 a month of new revenue without my involvement whatsoever. That's an asset, right? So if you want to sell your business at some point, you got to have a sales engine that is not you, the owner. Okay, super important. Same thing with managing team members, managing quality work. You as the owner cannot be on site all the time verifying quality. You got to have a team that does that. Basically, what I'm trying to say is, if you want to sell your business, you have to be doing nothing in your business to make it sellable. Okay. By the end, I delegated everything. I was actually at home about 3 days a week. I was bored out of my mind. People say, like, build your systems, build your team. Okay, I was like, okay, I did it. I'll do it. And I did it, but I didn't like it because I didn't have anything to do at the end, right? So, but that's the level you need to get to for your business to be sellable. Find something special about your business. The reason why someone will want to buy you is typically for a synergistic reason. They want to buy you because 1 + 1 = 3. Okay, so you have to have something special about your business so that when you sell to that buyer, you guys are better together. So in my case, I had a bookkeeping business. I did not do taxes. Deloitte did taxes and everything else, but they didn't do bookkeeping really well. So together we can be a powerhouse, because my clients can now have all these tax services, and Deloitte client can have this bookkeeping service as well. So if you are doing everything and you are the same like everyone else, then you're not special enough. You're not going to get a good valuation, right? If you want to sell for a high price, you need to have something special about what you do, who you are, the type of customers you serve. So going back to the, eco roof situation. Let's say you're a specialist in eco roof. It's all you do. You're really great at it. You have a team that does it. And then there's another roofing company that wants to get into that space. Well, hey, that's great. You're going to get a great valuation on that, because they want your skill set. They want your customer base. They want your branding. They want your know-how. And that's how you're going to add value to that buyer. Okay. those are the couple ways that you can create value.
That's awesome. Well, I would like to start to wrap up here because I know you got to go. And
Hmm.
one thing that I've been implementing in the last few podcasts has been a few quick answer questions that just kind of
Okay,
round off the episode. The
cool.
first question I want to ask you, and it used to be, how much coffee do you consume on a daily basis? But some people I've interviewed,
I'm drinking some right now.
yeah, some people I interviewed said, well, I don't drink coffee. So my question rather to you is, do you caffeinate yourself? And if so, how much? And what is your preferred method?
Preferred method is coffee. I drink a lot of coffee, but I'm realizing that coffee stains my teeth.
I can't tell from the video that I'm looking at right now.
Yeah,
These
yeah,
things
yeah.
are
No,
shiny.
I got black spots here and there because of the coffee stains. So I'm switching to Earl Grey and jasmine tea and green tea, just for times that I'm not super exhausted. But I love coffee in all forms.
Do you have a favorite brand?
Yeah, Elysian Coffee. That's my favorite. I think they're only in Vancouver right now, but they're a small batch roaster. They roast it right here in Vancouver. It's so good. I can't describe it. I'm not like a coffee connoisseur or anything, but it tastes so different. So good. I love that brand.
Elysian?
Elysian, yeah.
Elysian.
Elysian. Elysian Coffee.
We'll link to it so people can give it a
Okay.
shot.
There you go.
Second question is, what is one system, tool, or process that you implemented into your business or your life that had little to no implementation time or cost, but had the largest upside?
I would say a communication tool. So one way I can communicate with myself is Evernote. I don't trust my brain. I don't trust anything. If I have a good idea, I write it down right away.
Yeah.
For my team members, I implemented Slack, and now in Deloitte, we use MS Teams. That's been huge because, man, I had like so many emails, which I'm sure you do as well, right?
Mhm.
So using Slack, you eliminate so much internal email and keep it so organized. And so highly recommend establishing a communication tool like that.
Is there any quotes that you live your life by? I heard you throw a few quotes out as we were speaking, and you seem like the
Hmm.
type of guy that's going to take a lot out of books. Is there one or two that you seem to repeat to yourself the most or that resonated to you the most?
Yeah. One of my favorite quotes is from John Maxwell. I think I mentioned in the podcast before, everything rises and falls on leadership. That quote is so powerful because no matter what happens in the world, no matter what happens to me, I can always ask myself, like, how can I be different to impact whatever the problem that I'm seeing? How can that leader act differently to create a different impact? So, it's a really powerful statement. It gives me a different lens through which I look at the world. So that's my favorite quote.
Perfect. What are the top 1 to 3 books that you would recommend people read?
I think I already mentioned one. It's called Five Levels of Leadership by John Maxwell. Second one is How to Win Friends and Influence People. It's a people skills book. I'm talking to you right now. I'm very natural, but I'm actually a very shy person. And I grew
So am
up,
I.
yeah, I grew up as an introvert. I'm not great at networking events. I'm not great at drumming up business, but it's a skill that I had to learn. I got to be able to turn it on, so to speak, right?
Yeah,
So that book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, is a great people skills book that teaches you how to interact with others, build rapport, and all those good things. Number three, I would say it's a business book. It teaches you how to grow a business. It's called Scaling Up. It basically gives you step by step what you need to do to grow your business from $0 to $1 million and plus plus plus. It's a really great manual that you can implement in your business. We implemented almost all the tools in there, and we've seen a ton of success from it. So highly recommend it.
great. Do you have a meditation practice?
I don't, not in a traditional way. For me, meditation is just listening to podcasts and audiobooks. That's the way I get input because all day long I'm outputting. I'm saying things, writing emails, sharing ideas. So I got to be able to get that nourishment as well. So
Yeah,
podcasts and audiobooks have huge. And
awesome.
on that, I don't know if you knew this, but I actually had a New Year's goal to read 20 books in a year. I'm actually on book 23 right now because of
Wow,
that much
good for you.
yeah, the audiobooks and actually books that I'm reading. It's been so great to have that amount of input.
Amazing. Well, I know you got to kick out of here pretty soon. So where can people find more information about Legacy or yourself? And if anybody wants to get in contact for
Yeah.
either bookkeeping solutions or just with you in general, give us the quick and dirty where they can get at you.
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn a lot, so you can find me, Bob Wang on LinkedIn. I think I'm the only Asian Bob you see in Vancouver, Bob Wang. It's not a very popular name. So Legacy actually no longer exists. We're called Control by Deloitte, CTRL, Control. It's like the button on your computer there. It's actually a pretty cool name. Control by Deloitte. You can look us up online in Google. Yeah, you can find me in those places.
Is there anything else that you would like to leave people with to ponder or think about before you head out?
I would say, before we started this podcast, we had this quick conversation around like, is entrepreneurship for everyone? And really think about that question, because starting your own business is hard. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of heartbreak, but a lot of joy as well. And you got to really hustle. I'm an employee now. Before I was a business owner, and I think you went through a similar journey.
Yeah.
And there's pros and cons to being each, but really think through if starting a business is what you want. It's really rewarding, but it comes with a lot of heartbreak. So don't take it lightly.
That's true. Those are great words to leave off on. Well, Bob, thanks so much for coming on. Really appreciate it. And hopefully we can catch up for a round 2 at some point in the future.
Absolutely.
That's a wrap. That's a wrap, everybody.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of the Tools of the Trade podcast. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and leave us a 5-star review. For show notes, blog posts, resources, and access to our newsletter, check out toolspodcast.com.